Samuel Hayes was once a proud Marine, standing tall in his blues. Now, at 67, he's nothing more than a ghost on the streets of Fairhaven, Ohio, forgotten by the world that once saluted him. Lost in grief after his wife's death, Samuel has vanished into silence, surviving on scraps. But today, something's about to change. Stay with me and you'll see how one moment can restore a man's dignity. Hit subscribe and follow the journey. You don't want to miss this story. Samuel Hayes had lost count of the days. Time had become an endless blur of cold mornings and darker nights, where only the sharp sting of hunger reminded him he was still alive. Fairhaven had once been full of promise, but now, with its boarded-up storefronts and crumbling buildings, it mirrored his own broken soul. He was 67 but felt a lifetime older. Once he had been a Marine, strong, disciplined, and proud. Now, he was just another face in the crowd, invisible to the world. Every morning he slipped on his worn coat, tucking his military dog tags beneath the fabric, as if hiding the last trace of who he once was. His hands shook as he pulled the straps of his battered duffel bag over his shoulder, the same bag he'd carried through years of service and struggle. Every day was a battle, just getting by. No one spoke to him. Most people avoided him, crossing the street when they saw him. He didn't blame them. He was just another casualty, a reminder of a country that had forgotten the men and women who fought for it. Samuel's thoughts often turned to Caroline, his late wife. Her smile was still fresh in his mind, even after all these years. He missed her warmth, the way she used to laugh at his old war stories. When she had fallen ill, he had done everything in his power to fight for her. Yet the VA had failed them both. Her misdiagnosis had stolen her life, and with it, his will to keep going. After her death, Samuel didn't know where to turn. The house they had shared was gone, sold to pay the bills, and the last of their savings donated to a shelter she'd loved. He had nothing left but memories, and those memories were fading fast. On this particular day, the cold felt sharper than usual. His fingers were frozen as he rummaged through a trash can behind Marcy's diner, hoping to find something edible. The bell above the diner door jingled, signaling a customer inside. The aroma of fresh coffee and bacon drifted out, teasing his senses. But Samuel didn't dare go inside. He wouldn't ask for help, not even here where he had once been a regular. The kindness the waitresses had shown him in the past was fleeting. He wouldn't be a burden again. His stomach growled louder, and for a moment he considered walking into Paxton's grocery store just down the road. The thought made him uneasy. He hadn't stolen anything in years, but today the hunger clawed at him in a way he couldn't ignore. With a sigh, he shuffled toward the entrance, the cold air biting at his face. The store was dim, the air thick with the smell of old produce. He lingered by the back, eyeing the discounted apples and rolls that sat carelessly in a crate. They were bruised just like him. A small voice inside him whispered, "This isn't you, Samuel, you don't do this." But the hunger was louder. It gnawed at him, sharp and unrelenting. With trembling hands, he grabbed an apple and a roll. His heart hammered in his chest as he tucked the items into his coat. Just as he was about to slip out the door, a voice rang out, harsh and accusing. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Samuel froze, his body stiff with panic. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. He could feel the store owner, Mr. Paxton, marching toward him, his footsteps heavy and determined. Samuel's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he wanted to say. "I'm just hungry." But the words wouldn't come. Paxton's voice grew louder. "You're stealing, old man. You think I won't notice?" Samuel's heart raced. "I didn't mean it," he wanted to shout. But instead, he kept his head down, waiting for the inevitable. He felt the sting of shame, but also the sharp realization that this was his life now. A thief, an invisible man. Mr. Paxton was already dialing the police. Samuel stood there, frozen, not even attempting to flee. He couldn't. Where would he go? What was left to run to? The police would be here soon, and with them, more of the same, more indifference, more rejection. When the officers arrived, Samuel barely looked up. His knees felt like they might give way at any moment. Officer Derek Collins stood at the door, scanning the scene with an air of impatience. But it was Officer Maria Lopez who noticed something different. She saw the dog tags peeking from beneath Samuel's worn jacket. Her eyes narrowed, studying him carefully. For a brief moment she saw more than the ragged man before her. She saw a veteran. "You served?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost gentle. Samuel's eyes flickered. A long time ago when it mattered, he wanted to say. But instead he nodded weakly, his lips dry. "Long time ago," he muttered, barely audible. Lopez hesitated, something softening in her gaze. But before she could speak again, Collins was already radioing in the arrest. Samuel was handcuffed and led outside, his body numb, his mind too weary to protest. People in the street stared, some with curiosity, others with pity. No one stepped forward. No one cared enough to ask why. As Samuel was driven to the holding cell, he clutched Caroline's photograph in his pocket. The only thing. He had left. His fingers brushed over the image of her smiling face. "I'm trying, love. I'm trying," he whispered to the cold, empty air. It felt like a lie. But in that moment, it was all he had left. The police car rolled through the streets, carrying Samuel toward a future he couldn't yet see, but one that was about to change forever. As the squad car rolled away from Paxton's grocery, Officer Maria Lopez found herself staring at Samuel Hayes, sitting in the back seat, his face shadowed with resignation. She hadn't expected this. It was just a routine call. Yet there was something in his demeanor that unsettled her, something she couldn't shake. As they drove through the quiet streets of Fairhaven, Maria's mind drifted back to the first time she had seen Samuel. He was a fixture in this town, like so many others who had fallen through the cracks, but there was always something different about him. She had seen him a dozen times before, sitting in the corner booth of Marcy's diner, sipping coffee, his shoulders slumped under the weight of something long gone. The man had never begged, never asked for more than what he could scrape together. It wasn't just the hunger that haunted him. It was something deeper, something that Maria couldn't quite understand. She remembered her first conversation with him. He had been sitting alone by the window, staring out at the falling snow. She had stopped by to check on him, offering him a warm cup of coffee. She didn't know why she did it, maybe because something in his eyes made her pause. They had exchanged a few words, just small talk, but when she asked about his life, Samuel had simply looked away, his voice distant. "Some battles end with medals," he had said softly, almost to himself. "Others end with silence." Maria had never forgotten those words. What did he mean by that? She often wondered. The quiet sorrow in his voice lingered in her mind, making her feel like there was something more to this man than met the eye. Now, as she glanced at him through the rearview mirror, Maria couldn't help but notice the faint glimmer of something old and familiar in his eyes. The dog tags around his neck were a reminder of a past he couldn't escape, a past that had long since been buried beneath layers of dust and neglect. When they arrived at the station, Maria was the first to exit the patrol car. The sharp air stung her cheeks, but it didn't compare to the nagging feeling in her gut. She watched as the officers dragged Samuel from the car, his steps slow and measured, as if he had already given up on resisting. He was just another man in cuffs, another face in the system, but Maria couldn't stop herself from feeling that there was more to him. Inside the holding cell, she noticed the quiet intensity in his demeanor. There were no tears, no anger, just a deep, painful acceptance. Maria didn't know why, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Samuel Hayes didn't belong here. He's a Marine. He's one of us, she thought. But somewhere along the way, he had become lost, forgotten by everyone who should have remembered. As the hours ticked by, Maria found herself sitting at her desk, filing paperwork. But her mind kept returning to Samuel. She couldn't get the image of his hollow eyes out of her head. She knew the system. She knew what would happen next. Court, trial, a slap on the wrist, and he'd be forgotten once more. But something about Samuel's story felt unfinished. She had seen too many broken men like him, men who had served their country only to be cast aside when they came home. She didn't know why, but she couldn't let it happen to Samuel. Her fingers hovered over the phone, uncertain. What can I do? She wondered. She wasn't a counselor. She wasn't trained to help veterans. But there was something in her that couldn't ignore what was happening. It wasn't just the theft that bothered her. It was the years of neglect, the years of being forgotten that had led Samuel to this point. As she stared at the phone, the decision weighed heavily on her. Maybe I can help, she thought. Maybe it's time someone noticed him. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her jacket, and made her way to the back office where the rest of the officers were gathered. She needed to talk to someone, anyone. But the moment she opened the door, she froze. "Maria, what's going on?" Derek Collins asked, his voice heavy with concern. He had been one of the officers who'd brought Samuel in earlier. The older officer watched her closely, noting the conflicted look on her face. Maria opened her mouth to respond, but found herself struggling to find the right words. I'm not sure. But something about this feels wrong, she said, her voice. He's not just some vagrant, Derek. He's a Marine. He served. And now look at him. Derek raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. What are you saying, that we should just let him go? No, I'm not saying that, Maria snapped. But he needs help, not jail time. Her voice wavered, betraying her growing frustration. He deserves more than this. Derek sighed, pushing off from the doorframe. You know we can't just ignore procedure. He committed a crime, and you saw how he acted. Maria nodded, but her heart was heavy. She had seen what the system could do to people like Samuel. She had watched it happen too many times before, and each time she felt helpless to stop it. But this time, something inside her refused to let it go. Samuel Hayes deserved more. He deserved dignity. He deserved to be remembered. Maybe you're right, Derek muttered, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. But we can't change the system. Not today. Maria's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. Not today, but maybe someday. She wasn't sure what she could do yet, but she couldn't let this moment slip by. She would make sure Samuel's story didn't end in a forgotten jail cell. Not if she could help it. The weight of that decision settled deep in her chest. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was doing something, anything, worthy of the badge she wore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The morning light barely filtered through the grimy windows of the holding cell, as Samuel Hayes sat motionless on the cold metal bench. His body was stiff from the chill, but it was his heart, his soul, that felt frozen. Time had become a blur, but the pain never dulled. The hunger in his stomach had been replaced with an emptiness that gnawed deeper, something beyond physical need. It was a hunger for recognition, for the dignity that had been stripped from him long ago. The echo of Caroline's laughter seemed a lifetime away, drowned out by the pounding in his chest. He looked down at his hands, weathered and worn from years of struggle. The military dog tags around his neck felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of the life he once had, the man he once was. He tried to focus on something else, anything else, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Caroline, smiling as if she knew a secret he hadn't yet discovered. He missed her with a pain that was almost unbearable. But now, she seemed distant. Was he truly just a ghost, drifting aimlessly through a life that had passed him by? The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Samuel looked up to see a guard standing in front of his cell, his face impassive as he unlocked the door. "Court's in session," the guard said, his voice devoid of any empathy. "Get up." Samuel nodded, his movements stiff as he stood. His legs ached, and his body felt as if it might collapse, but he forced himself to shuffle toward the door. Every step was a struggle, each one pulling him further away from the man he once was. The past felt so distant now, like it belonged to someone else. A Marine. A hero. That was who he used to be, but it was hard to remember that man when the world saw him as nothing more than a homeless thief. As he was escorted through the cold hallways of the courthouse, the noise from the bustling world outside seemed to fade. The chatter of attorneys and the shuffle of papers blended into a dull hum. The courtroom loomed ahead, and with it, the harsh reality of his situation. His eyes were drawn to the familiar faces of the officers standing near the entrance, all of them looking at him with a mixture of disdain and indifference. Samuel didn't care. He didn't care about their stares, their whispers, their judgment. He had nothing left to lose, but as he stepped into the courtroom, something shifted. His heart raced in his chest as he noticed the presence of Judge Thomas. Whitaker at the bench, his face stern, his eyes hidden behind the wire-rimmed glasses. Samuel had been in front of many judges in his life, but none had ever looked at him the way Whitaker did. There was something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even something deeper. For a moment, Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Could it be? Could someone finally see him? Samuel's name echoed through the room, pulling him from his thoughts. He shuffled forward, his feet dragging as the cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his wrists. As he stood before the judge, the eyes of the courtroom were on him. Some looked away quickly, uncomfortable with what they saw. Others studied him with mild curiosity, their faces unreadable. The prosecutor, a young man named Alan Pierce, stood sharply at attention. He was eager, his suit crisp, his hair meticulously combed. The words came out of his mouth like a rehearsed script, detailing Samuel's petty crime, the theft of an apple and a roll from Paxton's grocery. "Your Honor," Pierce said briskly, "the defendant was apprehended while committing a petty theft at Paxton's grocery. Surveillance footage confirms the theft. The defendant has no fixed address, no employment, prior minor citations for loitering and public intoxication. The state recommends remand until trial to prevent further offenses." It was the same story, the same cold, indifferent words Samuel had heard countless times. The system had already decided what he was: a criminal, a nuisance, a man who didn't matter. But in that moment, something inside Samuel broke. He had been silent for so long, carrying the weight of his pain, his regrets, his forgotten years. But now, as the prosecutor spoke, as the weight of his past mistakes seemed to crush him, he couldn't stay silent anymore. Just as he opened his mouth, ready to speak, Judge Whitaker's gaze shifted. The judge paused, his eyes falling on something, a small, worn military dog tag that had slipped from Samuel's jacket pocket and clattered onto the bench. The sound of metal hitting wood echoed through the courtroom, silencing everything else. Whitaker leaned forward, his fingers brushing over the tag as he read the name: Hayes Samuel J. USMC. The courtroom was still for a moment. The air seemed to thicken as the judge held the dog tag, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. Samuel saw it, just for a moment, the flicker in Whitaker's eyes. It was as if the judge recognized him, as if he saw through the walls Samuel had built around himself. Samuel could feel it, the shift, the change in the air. For the first time in years, someone saw him. Not just the homeless man, not just the thief, but the man he used to be. "Recess." Judge Whitaker's voice broke the silence, his words sharp. 5 minutes. The courtroom buzzed with confusion. As the judge rose abruptly from his bench, his gavel falling with a finality that left Samuel reeling. For a moment, Samuel stood there, unsure of what was happening. No one had ever done this for him before. No one had ever stopped the gears of the system for him. But now, here he was, standing in the middle of the room, trying to grasp what was unfolding around him. He didn't dare hope. Not yet. Behind the closed doors of the judge's chambers, Whitaker stood staring at the dog tag in his hand. His mind raced, the memories flooding back in waves. Fallujah, 2004. The heat of battle. The moment when a soldier's life had been saved by the very man now standing before him, shackled and forgotten. Samuel Hayes had saved his life that day, and Whitaker had never forgotten it. As the door swung open, Whitaker emerged from his chambers with a new resolve. His steps were purposeful, his face set with a determination Samuel had never seen before. The room grew quiet as the judge sat back down. his gaze never leaving Samuel. "Mr. Hayes," Whitaker said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity, "this case will be stayed until further notice. I'm ordering an immediate review of your military records and your benefit status." He turned toward the prosecutor, silencing any objections with a raised hand. "Furthermore, this court will be requesting assistance from the Veterans Legal Defense Network to provide you with pro bono representation, effective immediately." Samuel stood frozen, unable to process the words, unable to understand what was happening. For the first time in years, someone was standing up for him. For the first time in years, someone was fighting for him. "You're not invisible here, staff. Sergeant," Judge Whitaker added softly, his words heavy with meaning. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest. He had come to this courtroom expecting to be dismissed, to be forgotten again. But now, as the judge's words hung in the air, a glimmer of hope stirred deep within him, a hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The days that followed felt like a dream to Samuel Hayes. For the first time in a long while, he was not just another forgotten face in a system that chewed people up and spit them out. The phone calls started coming in. Lawyers, veterans, organizations, even some old Marines who had heard his story. Each one offered their help, their support, their time. Samuel was no longer invisible. For the first time in years, he felt like someone remembered him, not for the mistakes, not for the theft, but for the man he had once been. The judge's decision to review Samuel's case was the catalyst that ignited a chain reaction. The Veterans Legal Defense Network took immediate action, their team of lawyers working tirelessly to reinstate Samuel's benefits. The system, which had once treated him as a statistic, now had no choice but to acknowledge his sacrifice. The VA issued an official apology for the mishandling of his benefits, a rare and powerful statement that Samuel could hardly believe when he first read it. The check for nearly $278,000 in back pay came soon after. But it wasn't the money that meant the most to Samuel. It was the validation. For years, he had felt like a man discarded by the world. Now, he was seen, heard, and respected once more. And then came the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he hadn't dared to hope for. A ceremony was held in Fairhaven, a small town that had nearly forgotten its own soul. The streets were lined with banners, the air filled with the sound of music and chatter. The veterans who had once fought beside him, some of them with graying hair and weathered faces, stood at attention in their dress blues. Behind them, civilians who had never known Samuel's story, but who had heard the whispers of his redemption, had gathered to honor him. As Samuel walked onto the stage wearing a neatly pressed coat over his marine dress blues, his medals gleaming in the light, the crowd erupted into applause. Not a single person in the crowd had ever known the full depth of his sacrifice. They hadn't seen the horrors he had faced, the pain he had endured, but they had heard his story, and they were here to honor him. The applause was thunderous, a sound that reverberated in Samuel's chest. He stood tall, unbroken, as the weight of years of loneliness and neglect seemed to lift from his shoulders. His eyes scanned the crowd, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something he had forgotten: pride, not just in the medals he had earned, but in the man he was becoming, the man who was no longer invisible. Judge Whitaker stood by his side, presenting him with a plaque inscribed with the words, "For service, sacrifice, and unseen valor, Fairhaven remembers." Samuel's voice trembled as he stepped to the podium, clutching the edges to steady himself. "I didn't save lives for medals," he began, his voice rough but steady. "I didn't fight for thanks. I fought because a man doesn't leave others behind." He paused, taking a deep breath, his heart swelling with emotion. "But when you come home, you hope maybe that someone will come back for you too." The crowd fell silent, the weight of Samuel's words sinking deep into their hearts. In that moment, Samuel wasn't just a man who had fought in wars. He was a man who had fought for his dignity, for his place in the world, and for the love of the woman who had meant everything to him. As his voice broke slightly, he added, "And you did." A wave of emotion swept over the crowd as Samuel's words echoed in the cool air. They weren't just applauding his bravery on the battlefield. They were applauding his bravery in life, for the quiet endurance that had carried him through years of hardship, for never giving up, even when it seemed like the world had forgotten him. After the ceremony, as the evening drew to a close and the last notes of music faded into the night, Samuel sat on a bench in the park. Beside him, Ellie, Caroline's niece, rested her head on his shoulder. Rocky, the service dog who had been donated to him, lay faithfully at his feet. The world felt quieter now, as if everything had fallen into place. Samuel reached into his coat pocket and drew out the photograph of Caroline. Her smile still shone brightly, and for the first time in years Samuel smiled too. "I found my way back," he whispered, his fingers tracing her face. "Just like you said I would." The first star of the evening blinked into existence above them, a quiet symbol of hope and new beginnings. Samuel Hayes, once lost and forgotten, had found his way back, not to the life he had once known, but to a new chapter, a chapter where he was no longer invisible, a chapter where he was seen, honored, and, most importantly, loved. As the night settled around him, Samuel leaned back, feeling the weight of his past lift off his shoulders. For the first time in years, he was free. Free from the chains of his past mistakes, free from the loneliness that had haunted him for so long, and for the first time, he felt like the man he had once been, a hero not because of the medals on his chest, but because of the battles he had fought within himself and the quiet strength he had found in the face of adversity. The world hadn't been kind to Samuel Hayes, but in the end, it had given him one gift, the chance to be seen, to be remembered, and that, Samuel realized, was all he had ever wanted. To be more than just a forgotten man, to be a hero once again.